good evening and welcome to everyone, especially on behalf of Hospital Services Limited, HSL and Fujifilm. I would like to welcome you all to this webinar, and very nice to see you all connected here this evening. So please enjoy the next 45 minutes where you will learn more about detection and characterization of lesions with the support of image-enhanced endoscopy, such as LCI and BLI, which are light modalities available on the Eluxeo Ultra system, but also to learn more about the latest technological development in endoscopy, which is AI, artificial intelligence, and how this could be beneficial for you in your daily work. So I kindly ask everyone to put your microphones on mute during the presentations and only to unmute it at the end of the presentations when there is room for questions. Also, if you have a question, you can also put it in the chat function so that the speakers are able to read it and answer your question as well at the end. And also what I would like to ask is to put your cameras on because it's always nice to see the faces of the audience. And just the final information is that the session will be recorded. So it's my pleasure to introduce to you our two speakers for tonight, which are, first of all, a warm welcome for Professor Clark from Charter Medical, who also works in Portiuncula Hospital and the University of Limerick. And Professor Clark will start with the first lecture on Eluxeo with LCI and BLI, and will later on also in other presentation share his experiences with CADEYE, the AI system of Fujifilm, which is part of the Eluxeo Ultra system. And secondly, also a warm welcome to Professor Bandari from the Queen Alexandra Hospital in Portsmouth, the UK. Professor Bandari will explain more in detail how CADEYE works, what support it can give, and also to share his experiences with it. So yeah, to start, I would like to give now first the words to Professor Clark for his first presentation.
Okay, alrighty. I'm going to share the screen now. Okay, so can you see that?
Yes, yeah, we can see it.
Okay, do I need to go to the display window or is this okay?
Yeah, you can put it on presentation mode.
Okay. Alrighty.
Yeah, perfect.
So thanks very much to Fujifilm and HSL for inviting me to give this presentation this evening on the latest developments in endoscopic imaging. So these are my disclosures, so I'll just spend the minimum time showing them. The major advance that we've encountered over the last 5 years or so is the LED light source. So previous iterations of video endoscopes and indeed optical fiber endoscopes delivered light from a high intensity discharge, usually a xenon bulb, and that was sent to the tip of the scope via fiber optic cables. Fujinon and Pentax and the Olympus 100 series used white light with the true color CCD chip, and the Olympus 200 series used strobed RGB light with a monochrome CCD, which is strictly speaking a CMOS chip. That was the case. So when you had a white light source with the true CCD chip, you were really confined to post-processing of image enhancement. And the first such system was Pentax iScan. So I'm not going to go into what they did with iScan, but it was manipulation of the video image by image processing software rather than changing the way the image was perceived in the first instance. So if you do not have white light but have light being delivered in other colors, real image enhancement is possible, and the first such contribution was from Olympus with narrowband imaging. But Fuji Eluxeo technology delivers multi-wavelength light directly at the scope tip using 4 separate light emitting diodes. So this enables obviously different and narrower light wavelengths with greater intensity of light, which improves the resolution potential of the scope and the possibility of real color enhancement, whilst not precluding the possibility of post-processing enhancement as well. So that's BLI, blue light imaging mode, and LCI. So here is an image using the latest generation with standard white light. Here is an image then using the LCI mode, which is linked color imaging. And the purpose of this mode is to enhance the ability of the operator, either on his own or with CADEYE, as we'll talk about later, to actually detect polyps. So that's LCI mode. And then finally, this is BLI mode. So this is a typical adenoma, and the BLI mode isn't as suitable for the primary detection of the adenomas, because although the illumination is really excellent, the optical properties of blue light mean that the overall illumination over a depth of field isn't as good and isn't recommendable for initial polyp detection, but it is obviously optimal for characterization of capillary patterns on the surface of the mucosa. So the reason this is the case actually goes back to an Irishman, a Scotsman, and an Englishman. So an Irish physicist in the early 19th century noted or first observed light scattering. So the reason why the sky is blue is because of light scattering. So James Clerk Maxwell, the great Scottish physicist, elucidated the waveform nature of electromagnetic energy, and his equations then enabled Lord Rayleigh to formulate the equations and describe the principle of elastic light scattering. And what this means is that light of the lowest wavelength, which is obviously violet, it will penetrate less deeply into the tissue than red light. So the absorption is maximal at the superficial level, and this low wavelength of light is also maximally absorbed by hemoglobin. So blue light, as in BLI, maximally demonstrates superficial capillaries. So that is its great advantage. So we know in pods from the work of Kudo et al. That we can characterize with a high degree of accuracy whether a polyp is adenomatous or hyperplastic by looking at the pit patterns. So I'll just show you one more slide just to remind you of those pit patterns. and we can come back to them later on. So I'm going to hand you over to my colleague now, who's going to continue the presentation. Okay.
Thank you very much, Professor Clark. I believe now we're handing over to Professor Bandari, and he's going to do a presentation for us now.
Hi, can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Oh, excellent. I was talking to myself all this time. Thanks. Thanks for building the background about, I didn't know that an Irishman, Scotsman, and hopefully an Englishman all together managed to find these lights. That's a mammoth effort. Good to know that. Let me share my screen. Okay. Okay. So I hope you can see my screen now. So I'll quickly go through some concepts of AI. Well, these are my conflicts, which are usually with all the endoscopy company. I work with everybody, so not really, I don't have a conflict. AI, so is it going to be a threat or an opportunity? It all depends on the way we look at it. I will basically focus on how, whether we really need AI, how it works, and then show you the AI platform from Fujifilm as to how it works. You already heard about the development in the endoscopy world. You know, only about 5 years ago, I would say 6 years ago, we were looking at standard definition endoscope. And in these last years, there's been a very, very rapid pace development in the endoscopy world to this modern LED platform, and now AI along with it. So endoscopy, I feel, is going through a revolution. Technology is really, really going very fast, and the clinicians have to catch up. Otherwise, we will not utilize the full potential of this. So, do we miss polyps? Of course we do, but we don't like to accept it. If you look at the data, almost up to anywhere between 15 to 27% of the polyps are being missed. We also know about the implications of increasing the adenoma detection rate. This was a landmark paper from Michael Kaminsky where they showed that every 1% increase in ADR results in a 3% reduction in the risk of colorectal cancer. So we do miss polyps. We know that if we can detect more polyp, we can reduce the risk of patient dying from colorectal cancer. So we definitely need to do something to change this scenario. So why? Well, there are a lot of reasons. Experience, skills, lack of attention, poor kit. Generally, I like to blame everything on poor kit. But now if you're using Eluxeo, it's very difficult to blame it on poor kit. We do get tired. And then there are lots of other human factors all together results in missed neoplasia. And unfortunately, a proportion of these patients will come back with interval cancer. And this is what we aim to avoid. That is the whole aim of doing colonoscopy, that as the standards of colonoscopy improve, this interval cancer rate should become very, very close to zero. Nothing can be zero, but if it can be as close to zero, it will be great. So I feel the main three challenges of endoscopy is there's a lot of difference in the skill level of endoscopists. The outcome of endoscopy is subjective depending on the skill level, experience, and the quality of the endoscopist. The kit does make a difference, but I think that one of the biggest determinant is this, and this is a human thing. And humans, no two humans are the same, and their skills and experience can't be the same either. And that's why there's a variable outcome with endoscopy. And that's where I feel bringing in artificial intelligence can provide that level playing field. Doesn't matter who the endoscopist is, as long as we meet some basic essential criteria. We do get tired, and there's clear data that endoscopists who do morning and afternoon colonoscopy, their polyp detection rate in the afternoon is a lot lower than the one in the morning. So there is this factor which impacts our performance. Now you might say that maybe I'm getting old, but this applies in this study. There were endoscopists of all age groups. Then there are certain lesions which are very difficult to detect, like sessile serrated polyps, non-granular LSTs, the small polyps. There are a range of polyps which are very difficult to detect, very easy to miss, and that's where we need help. So I think these are the main things where we need help. And AI certainly will not get tired between morning, afternoon, evening. Definitely, for sure, it will not get tired. And then depending on how it's trained, it will also find all those subtle lesions. And the important thing is that it will give you an alert, a visual alert, as well as an audible alert. So not only the endoscopist, but even the nurses in the room will know when a polyp is detected. How does AI work? Well, two broad theories, machine learning and deep learning. Well, deep learning is a sort of machine learning, but for many, many years, we spent a lot of time on this basic machine learning, old-fashioned technique. And the main thing with this was we had to give a lot of labeled data to the machines for them to process, to tell them this is what it is. So every time you see in the past when the efforts were made, we used to give them polyps that this is type 2 pit and this is type 3 pit, all kind of labeled data. Whereas these modern deep learning algorithms, they do not require labeled data, unlabeled data, and they can give you the answers. So to put it in a very simple way, with machine learning, you have to feed a lot of pictures of the cats and tell the machine that the cats have 4 legs, a tail, pointed ears, and flat nose. And a dog also has 4 legs, tail, but they have floppy ears and protruding nose. And then it can start distinguishing between cats and dogs. Whereas with deep learning, humans don't need to do anything. We just feed lots and lots of images and computer does its job. As long as it's been told these are dog images and these are cat images, it will find them. So life has become a lot easier with these modern neural networks. And based on this, a lot of manufacturers have come to the market with computer-aided detection. The only thing is Fujifilm was the first one to come out with CADEYE-based polyp detection, as well as computer-aided polyp characterization. So this is the only CE-marked platform available. Only very recently, just a few weeks ago, an independent player called Wise Vision has also come out and is CE-marked with detection and characterization, but they don't exist in the endoscopy world, so they will have to find their way through. But for all practical purposes, at the moment, we have Fujifilm, which is providing. Olympus has EndoBrain and EndoAid, but both EndoAid is a detection platform. EndoBrain with this endocytoscope does characterization, but that's very, very cumbersome. I don't think that's an experimental tool rather than a practical tool. So that's the advantage of Fuji's platform, is that we got detection and characterization both. Does it make a difference? Now, these are the main landmark papers with AI and polyp detection, and we recently summarized these in our meta-analysis where we looked at about 4,000 plus patients. They're all randomized controlled trials comparing computer-aided detection with non-computer-aided human detection. What it shows is that if you use AI, your ADR goes up from 25% to 36%. So significant improvement in your adenoma detection rate. Then these are all very, very recent. You can see in the last 2 years, all these publications have come out showing that AI will improve your polyp and adenoma detection rate. What about CADEYE? This is how it works. It has the detection, it is a simple black box which sits on your stack. You can activate it by pressing one of the switches which can be programmed, whether switch 3 or 2 you press, and then that's it. It's ready to detect. It will do its detection job both on white light and LCI. As soon as you change it to BLI, which is what we normally do when we find a polyp, the characterization software kicks in and it starts giving you optical diagnosis of what the pathology could be, whether it's adenoma or hyperplastic polyp. So this just gives you in more detail. Here you see that when it finds a polyp, you get this bounding box, 4 blue markings around the polyp, which tells you. At the same time, there's a sound alert when it finds the polyp, and there's another visual alert around the entire frame to show that the platform has found a polyp. What about characterization? Once you found and you activate BLI, you don't need to do anything. Automatically, it does optical diagnosis. Here you can see this is an adenoma, and when you have an adenoma, you get this yellow sort of marking around your frame, and at the bottom of the screen, you can see it says neoplastic. And then you get a heat map on the side, which shows you the location. And because it's adenoma, the heat map is yellow. So it's very clear to remember yellow heat map, adenoma, and there's a clear written instruction here that it's neoplastic. Just to emphasize the same thing again, that you'll get a visual alert. And then if it is a hyperplastic polyp, it will be green. Heat map will be green. And if it is an adenoma, it will be yellow. So just remember, green is hyperplastic or non-neoplastic, and yellow will be adenoma or cancer. I hope this video works. There we go. So we're just doing a retroflexion in a very difficult situation here. And you see the audible alert there. So if you are tired or sleepy or distracted, that sound will make you alert that there is a polyp. There's a visual bounding box on the screen to show you exactly where the polyp is. So you can't afford to miss it. How about the whole thing? If you, there's an audible alert. We found a polyp. I'm rotating it to 6 o'clock. You can see there's a polyp there very clearly. A change to BLI, immediately it says neoplastic, and you saw the heat map.
Recording in progress.
Yeah. So again, another example here, neoplastic, yellow heat map. It's written at the bottom as well as neoplastic. It's a typical adenoma, heat map, everything confirms the same. You run this one, it says hyperplastic. There's a tiny hyperplastic polyp. It's green heat map. So again, very simple and easy with these alerts and color coding to make out what is what. Another example, this was a difficult one. We felt it could be hyperplastic or adenoma. Looks like an adenoma, but actually it was a hyperplastic polyp, and it did turn out to be hyperplastic. This is very important one, and it's well documented and well proven. When we find this polyp, an endoscopist focuses on the polyp that they've first seen. If there is a polyp in the same area around it, we tend to ignore. Do you see the polyp at the bottom, 6 o'clock? This polyp was missed by our fellow till CADEYE found it. So this is going to be the other big advantage. If there are 2 or 3 polyps in the same area, it is very distracting for endoscopists who would focus on 1 or 2 and would ignore the other, not intentionally, but that's how the human brain works. Whereas CADEYE will not get distracted. It will show you all the polyps in the frame that it sees. So just to emphasize some very, very simple but practical points, that for you to get a good optical diagnosis, please clean the mucus and your lens to get a good view of the polyp. That's when you will get a good optical diagnosis that applies to all principles of endoscopy. Try to remove the bubbles in water because they can interfere in the interpretation of the algorithm. So please try to remove bubbles in water. You should have a stable endoscope. Ideally, I advise everybody that once you find a polyp, please bring the polyp to 6 o'clock and stay within about 2 to 5 centimeter. Between 2 to 4 centimeter is when you get the perfect view about detection as well as characterization. So this is fine when it is like this, but 6 o'clock could be even better. We should avoid all this. Any nuisance and disturbance around it should be avoided. And you need, if there were 2 or 3 polyps, you need to be sure which polyp you're looking at, which polyp it is characterizing. And as far as I remember, I think CADEYE can detect and characterize up to 4 or 5 polyps in one frame and give you diagnosis for that. And that you will have to correlate this heat map to the polyps. So characterization, I'm sure you all seen that for the last about 10 years, maybe 15 years, since the beginning of NBI, FICE, chromoendoscopy, iScan, there's stacks of studies showing that endoscopists can make optical diagnosis. And in enthusiastic hands, it has always worked. When we do multi-center studies, and this was one of the big multi-center studies in UK, we wanted to implement NBI-based optical diagnosis and see if we can implement resect and discard strategy. Unfortunately, despite the training, the accuracy of endoscopies was only 68%. So we could not implement resect and discard strategy. So we do need help with polyp characterization. This is our early work that we presented at UGW. We looked at 150 polyps with CADEYE, and you can see here, the top screen, if you look at this, you can see the sensitivity for adenoma for CADEYE was 95% versus the 81.6% of the endoscopists. And a negative predictive value of CADEYE was 90.6 as compared to 68%. So CADEYE certainly performed better than endoscopists in these 150 polyps that we looked at. And this continued to be true for all ranges of polyp, whether they were less than 5 millimeter, 10 millimeter, or rectosigmoid polyp, with a very impressive negative predictive value for those in the rectosigmoid area. The evidence is building up, and we're getting a lot of abstracts coming out. This was the original validation study, which was published in Endoscopy. This was the data that was used to develop these algorithms, and looks very impressive. And more case reports coming. So very soon we'll have some very good data coming out showing how this is going to change our practice. So finally, I think there are lots of positives. I feel that AI will not replace endoscopists, but there's a real possibility that endoscopists using AI will outperform those who will not be using AI. Now, this is my prediction and belief. It needs to be proven. And the early randomized control trials have already proven that it improves the adenoma detection rate if you use AI. It will act as an expert or a second observer to improve the overall performance and outcome of colonoscopy. There are certain concerns. People worry about false positives. It might take too much time looking at things which are not relevant. Would it miss pathology? If the endoscopist doesn't recognize, if AI doesn't recognize, yes. There could be wrong management if it recognizes some fold as a polyp and endoscopist doesn't know that it is a false positive, then he will resect a fold, and that could be dangerous. But in my experience, that hasn't happened. And generally, when it calls fold a polyp and you go close to it and inflate some air, it will obviously the signal will disappear and will tell you it's not a polyp. So it's just, these are the simple things that we have to learn and adapt. But ultimately, this is not a replacement of endoscopic skills. We still need to train people to get to cecum, to expose the mucosa properly, and to have all this knowledge and experience of making the right decision for the right lesion for the right patient. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pradeep. Very good. Before we answer some questions, I think we go to the presentation of Professor Clark, the second presentation. And after that, we can answer some questions when there are from the audience.
Okay. Okay, so we're going to talk now about the basic science and the history. So, in fact, this all begins not with pulp detection or even image recognition, but voice transcription and voice recognition. And it actually goes back a long, long way. So, and unfortunately, there were no Irish, Scots, or English scientists involved. It was actually Americans, but it was probably the Americans had better German scientists than everyone else at that stage. But anyway, Bell Labs had a system which they anticipated would be useful in automated telephonic exchanges, and that could recognize 10 or 20 words. And in the 1980s, IBM took this on, and people who do a lot of gambling or even decision analysis will know about hidden Markov models. So they applied that particular branch of statistical probability to voice recognition. So what they did was they chopped up the digitized sounds, which is the bit stream, into what they called septra. So septra, where time was on one axis, and then you had amplitude and frequency on the other two axes. So it was a three-dimensional vector, and they were able to do Fourier transformations of the data. So you will no doubt remember Fourier transformations from your happy days studying maths. So they managed to match what were then mathematical formulae to what are called phonemes. Phonemes are the fundamental unit of speech. And then the system learned to match the speech to words. And this was associated with quite a lot of processing requirements, which in the 1980s meant something really expensive. But nowadays, those processing requirements can be done in your iPhone, basically, as you probably know. So image recognition was then a handy byproduct of these mathematical discoveries. So face recognition was first conceptualized as an adjunct for security and law enforcement, and it still is, particularly in authoritarian jurisdictions. I won't mention any names in case my internet is cut off again. So it's the identical algorithms and the identical machine learning systems underpin face recognition that underpin voice recognition. So it is this face recognition is essentially the same as polyp detection and characterization, but it's just applied in a different way. So the machine looks for variations in contour and color. So unlike humans, the machine is not fazed by whether or not the polyp is flat or raised or depressed, whereas humans are best adapted for seeing raised polyps. The polyp should be sought for under white light and LCI, but not BLI, as we stated earlier. And if the polyp is identified by the CADEYE, then we have to switch to BLI for pit characterization. So yellow is the color of neoplasia, and green is the color of hyperplasia. There is one little bugbear in that serrated adenomata are not regarded by CADEYE currently as adenomata, and I suppose this is partially because histologically not all serrated polyps are regarded as adenomata either, but it's anticipated that things will change over time. So I'm not going to show you the hyperplastic video because I think we had quite a few, but so here's actually a case we did recently in Charter Medical. So I'm just going to start the video. So the frame has found the polyp, and we've switched to BLI, and we can see that when we just get close to it, you can see that the pit pattern has been identified, and it's clearly neoplastic. Now you can see a little bit of leftover stool, and that also shows up as yellow, but that just illustrates that it is absolutely vital not to detect the polyp in BLI light, but to use either white light or LCI. So we removed that polyp, obviously, and this is the actual histology. So as you can see, the bits that we were seeing with the superficially are adenomatous polyps, but unfortunately for this patient, and this emphasizes the double importance of high detection rates, we can see that there is actually deeper in the polyp, there is invasive carcinoma. And we did a cold snare, so there's no cautery artifact, but you know, there's carcinoma right to the edge of the resection margin there. So that's a pretty small polyp. The statistics would suggest that that polyp might be missed in maybe 5% of cases, even with a relatively experienced operator. So it brings home, you know, that's absolutely vital that we optimize polyp detection and discovery. So I was just going to move on then briefly to talk about transnasal endoscopy, with the view to showing you some of the capabilities of the new Fujifilm super slim scope. So obviously the unsedated transnasal endoscopy is the principal reason we do it. So the patient is usually seated. The patient can return to regular activities much sooner after a normal scope. But it does have other important uses. Firstly, it can bypass a very tight stricture, which can have important implications for diagnosis. You can perform a transnasal percutaneous gastrostomy with Seldinger technique. You can do a swallow assessment, fees, and you can actually, in certain circumstances, perform a cholangioscopy. But I'm just going to show you a video now of a lady who's referred with high-grade dysphagia symptoms, and this shows you what the scope looks like and the image quality. So we're just going into the hypopharynx there and into the esophagus. Now, if you were using a conventional transoral scope, when you see the pathology being encountered, you would not be able to get through. So this would seem ostensibly to be an esophageal cancer. But as we go through the very tight stricture into the stomach, you will see that all is not what meets the not the cat eye, but the original eye. So so we're just waiting to get into the duodenum here. The other thing about this scope is that it does take normal biopsy channel accessories. So you're not confined to a very small forceps, for example, and you can use other accessories as well. So as we retroflex here, you can see that. So the first sign really that something is not as it should be. So as we come back up, we can see that there is an ulcerating lesion just below the true OGJ, and I unfortunately didn't get the histology due to the cyber attack here, but this actually turns out to be a gastric lesion, and what we're all seeing here is submucosal infiltration, and the biopsies that we took from the stricture demonstrate actually a normal esophageal epithelium, which is infiltrated by gastric cancer. So without the transnasal approach, we would have been somewhat in the dark, at least initially, about the true nature of this unfortunate patient's tumor. So I'm going to stop that there now. So that's it then for me. So I think we're going to go back to the panel now for questions.
Yes, thank you, Professor Clark, as well for your presentation. I think, yeah, we can take a few minutes now if there are some questions from the audience. So if you have a question, please unmute yourself and yeah, feel free to ask any questions you have.
I have a question, please, for Professor Bandari. Good evening, Professor. Do you apply any cost savings to the detection data with specific attention to a reduction in rescoping rates?
Oh. So time will tell us. I think the biggest cost saving will be if we improve the detection rate, the interval cancer rate will drop. If the interval cancers are the one which are the most expensive, that's where most of the money is spent. And unfortunately, still some people don't survive despite all the cost. So I think that's what I'm hoping, that if we improve the detection rate with the help of CADEYE and better skills, interval cancer rate drops down, and that's where the cost saving will come. The other side of it is that the counter to it is that if you're going to use CADEYE, you'll find more polyps. If you're going to find more polyps, you'll do more surveillance. So you'll have to scope more patients. So if you're in Ireland, it's good news, you'll make more money. If in England, it's a pain for us because they add to the waiting list. So it swings both ways, but the most important thing is drop in the interval cancer rate. And that's what is going to save lives and save money.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Good evening. I have a question for both profs, actually. Thank you very much indeed for a very interesting talk from both of you. It was just to ask, how do you feel that the addition of AI has affected your practice or influenced your practice? And secondly, do you use CADEYE every single time whenever you're scoping?
Do you want to go first, Gerard?
Okay, thank you very much. So I do use CADEYE every time that I'm using equipment that has CADEYE on it. So I think that I have the confidence that I will leave certainly left-sided polyps that I'm in agreement with CADEYE that it's hyperplastic. So I have a pretty high degree of confidence when both CADEYE and I agree. So you don't need to take those polyps out, you don't need to sample them, and you don't need to send them for histology, which is associated with the cost saving. So the detection, I think, there is an enhanced detection, and that may, I suppose, increase the time it takes to do the procedure, because you will obviously want to characterize everything that's detected. And the final thing that I have, made it a little more strict on the patients for prep, because there is probably no point using CADEYE on a poorly prepared colon. So they're the changes it's made for me. So I'll hand you back to my colleague now.
Sure. Well, I think probably you're right. The one thing that we have noticed is that if we leave the CADEYE on all the time, which is what we should do, as the fluid, the folds, that can be temporarily detected, and it can make the audible alerts. So we like to turn that down, the audible alerts. Otherwise, everyone is always alert in the room, which is not a bad thing to do. But otherwise, I find it's quite helpful. And a couple of times we have found some sessile serrated polyps. I have a lot of fellows who work with me, and they just go past them without even thinking. And now it's a rule that if it shows you a bounding box appears on the screen, please interrogate it. If it is a false positive, when you go and inflate, it will disappear. If it isn't false positive, it will remain persistent. So I think that is one big advantage. Second is, in UK, at least, we have this rule that unless our fellows have done 250 or 300 supervised colonoscopies, we can't leave the room. It's a real pain. I have to sit in there till they've done their 300 colonoscopies. So I feel that's going to be our next big thing. I've just proposed this to JAG, that in our new standards, could we use this as a replacement for a consultant? And instead of sitting in the room, the CADEYE or similar platforms watching it. So that could make things more efficient. But characterization is going to be a big thing. It has the potential for us to introduce resect and discard strategy. I'll be honest, I haven't introduced that yet, because we haven't sorted out all the archiving bit related to it. How to store the image, how to link the image, and how to document those things. That is an ongoing process. Once we've sorted that out, I think technology is there for us to practice resect and discard or diagnose and leave strategy. So we are very, very close to introducing that strategy, and that's when it will make a difference. The only missing peg here is the sizing. At the moment, I feel endoscopists, we have the cutoff of 5 millimeter. I think if you show a 3 millimeter polyp, one endoscopist will call it 2, the other one will call it 6, and someone else will call it 5. So we still don't have a perfect sizing mechanism. It's all a guesswork. So I think very soon AI-based sizing of polyps will come. Then we have detection, characterization, sizing, and we are all set to introduce resect and discard and diagnose and leave strategy. And that's when cost saving, everything, change in practice will happen.
Super, thank you very much indeed. I just have a further add-on to that. Do you think that bowel cancer screening centres should have AI as a matter of course now?
That's a very good point, because the UK monitors the bowel cancer screening data regularly. And I don't know if you know, in UK, our bowel cancer screening endoscopists are like the Premier League endoscopists. They play in the top league because they've been through so many tests. despite that there's a huge variation between endoscopists in their ADR and polyp per patient. So definitely there's a need. And at the moment, we used to say, when it was introduced, we used to say that scope guide should be mandatory. That has disappeared now. Now, I think this is the new thing that will come, and it won't be long before it will happen that AI should be mandatory.
Yeah, I would certainly agree. I mean, anything that enhances polyp detection rates and reduces the risk of interval cancers is essential. And in the overall scheme of things, it is quite low cost. It certainly would cost you about the same as an additional colonoscope, or possibly a little bit more expensive than the kit for CO2 inflation. So it's not really a luxury. It's more a necessity. And I think with the, in our common law jurisdictions where we have such a low standard of proof of negligence for a plaintiff in a case, if it's established that a means of avoiding an unfavorable outcome was available and ignored and ought to have been considered, well, I think that a plaintiff could well be successful. So from a medical legal perspective, I think if the technology is available, proven, and acceptable, it should be in place in all centres providing the service.
That's a very interesting angle. I agree. I think that's something which will become more commonly debated. Maybe it's time for beer, Saskia, now.
Yeah, probably, yeah. Especially for us now here. Yeah. But yeah, if there are no more questions, thanks a lot, Professor Clark and Professor Bandari, for these excellent presentations. We really learned a lot, I think, and very informative. As a final word, I just want to hand over to Paddy from HSL, who made this webinar possible. Paddy?
Thank you very much, Saskia. Actually, I didn't make it possible at all. It was my colleagues' hard work who put the thing together, and I'd like to thank all of them equally for doing that. Very, very interesting as usual. Thank you, Professor Clark, Professor Bandari. Really, really interesting talk. I certainly have again learned a lot out of that. I'd like to bring that across the island of Ireland to the industry, for want of a better word. And show people at first hand the benefits of the cutting edge technology that we have got from Fujifilm. Transnasal is the next big thing coming down the tracks in terms of its efficacy, the improvements that's been made there, the speed of turnaround and the cost savings that will be achieved. That again is something that we want to promote heavily as well. I promise you all, we will be following up with the people who've participated. I'd like to thank you for your time. On a kind of cloudy, kind of sunny evening, maybe we want to get outside and go for a walk or something. But again, thank you, Saskia. Thank you, the crew from Fujifilm, as always. You're excellent people. And again, everybody involved in HSL, I really appreciate your efforts. Thank you.